All right, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. I'm going to get started with introductions. My name is Rebecca Poole, and I'm the Director of Membership and Communication for CNYC, the Council of New York Cooperatives and Condominiums. For those of you unfamiliar with CNYC, we're a membership organization providing education, information, and advocacy for New York City's cooperatives and condominiums. Our educational and advocacy resources are substantial thanks to our longevity. We've been serving co-ops and condos for over 40 years, and the ongoing dedication of our board of directors and our executive director, Marianne Rothman, is the reason for that. As Marianne mentioned at our Fair Chance for Housing webinar yesterday, CNYC has been on a bit of a Local Law 97 journey over the past 2 years. It certainly had its ups and downs and will continue to have ups and downs for the foreseeable future. While CNYC has long supported the goal of decarbonization, we recognize that Local Law 97 is not an easy law to follow. The difficulty of the ask increases the significance of moments like today, which is a direct result of partnership, connections, and collaboration. To the board members and property managers amongst us who have spent hours and hours in webinars, who have researched and hoped and gone back to the drawing board to research and hope again, thank you for your insights and honesty. To the professionals who've contributed to CNYC's Local Law 97 series, which started as 4 classes and as of tonight will be at 17, thank you. To the many individuals at NYSERDA, New York City Accelerator, Urban Green, Building Energy Exchange, the Mayor's Office, the New York League of Conservation Voters, and Martha Sickles, who have spent the time sharing their knowledge and seeking input from co-op and condo board members, thank you. Deputy Commissioner Popa and her team, thank you for always making yourselves available and for never shying away from making introductions for us. One of those introductions has led to this evening. Finally, to Molly and Jen, our speakers this evening and creators of this tool. They have given willingly of their time, expertise, and ingenuity as they developed a tool for co-ops and condos completely pro bono. Not only that, they've produced it so that it can become your own the more you use it. We are truly grateful. It's now my pleasure to introduce Molly and Jen. Molly D. Ramasamy is the director of the JB&B Deep Carbon Reduction Group, a team focused on decarbonization in the built environment. Her experience includes energy and carbon reduction master planning, strategic electrification, decarbonization consulting, industry research, and innovation. Since founding the Deep Carbon Reduction Group in 2019, Molly has successfully led building decarbonization and electrification studies representing tens of millions square feet of real estate. Many of these studies have been public-private partnerships with state and city agencies that serve to demonstrate decarbonization approaches that are scalable and affordable and that promote grid flexibility in dense urban environments. Jen Wren is a product manager with the JB&B Deep Carbon Reduction Group, where she drives product development and process innovation to enhance business delivery. With over 12 years of experience in energy management and sustainability, she has worked with a diverse range of clients, including asset owners and large real estate investors. Jen's expertise spans data-driven efficiency solutions and life cycle assessments, helping clients navigate the evolving landscape of decarbonization and regulatory compliance. Before I turn the floor over, some quick housekeeping notes. Please enter your questions into the Q&A as we go, and we'll read them in to Molly and Jen during appropriate breaks through the presentation. We would like any feedback that you have, please enter it into the Q&A or email us. Thank you, and Molly, Jen, the floor is now yours.
Thanks, Rebecca. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Let me start by saying thanks for having us on. We're very happy to be here and happy to be contributing positively to your efforts and the efforts of the people on the call in general in getting ready for Local Law 97. So let's see, let's do the old screen share. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to our training webinar on what we're calling the Local Law 97 Decarb Pathway Planning Tool. I think Rebecca gave a great introduction on what this tool is about, kind of how it came to be, but we're going to go into some specifics, specifically around why we've developed this, how to use it, and then my colleague Jen on the call here is going to do a demonstration with some real data so that you can get a real sense of how to use it in a way that hopefully will be helpful to you as you start to plan for Local Law 97. So you can get a sense of the agenda here. I won't waste too much time. I'll jump right in since there's plenty to cover. Just very quickly, and before we get into the nuts and bolts of the tool itself, for those of you that aren't familiar with our organization, right, Jen and I are with Jarls, Baum and Bowles, commonly known as JB&B in the industry. We're consulting engineers, over 100 years of experience. A majority of our work is in New York City, and so we have a very keen awareness and sense of what's going on and the challenges that are being faced broadly in the built environment, specifically around energy and carbon. Jen and I are members, as Rebecca mentioned, of our Deep Carbon Reduction Group, right? So this is the energy, sustainability, and decarbonization arm of JB&B, and we offer all sorts of things in that realm. But I like to show this slide because I think it gets to the heart of what we're about, which is engineering the carbon out of buildings. So with that, now you know a little bit about who we are, who we're with, and we'll get into the specifics of this tool, starting with a very brief and high-level overview of Local Law 97. Now, I understand that most folks on this call probably already know quite a bit about this law. Just in case, for whatever reason, you're newer to it, we like to start things off with a little context. So the key information about this particular local law, I think, is, summarized well on this slide here. Effectively, it's a carbon emissions cap law for buildings greater than 25,000 gross square feet, right? This year is the first year in which people are reporting their data based on 2024 information. And the thing about these carbon caps, as many of you are aware of already, is that they become more stringent effectively every 5 years, right? So we're not just working towards a limit for a building in 2024 through 2029, which is the first compliance period. In 2030, there's a reduction in allowable limits across the board. And so it's really kind of a long-term planning exercise with a little bit of a moving target. And hopefully the tool that we introduced today will give you a sense of how certain projects and buildings can change an outlook over that longer duration time frame. I mentioned first reporting is this year, right? So I know that that's a big to-do for folks. We're obviously very involved in preparing filings for people working with the Department of Buildings, understanding the new reporting protocols and the tool, the BEAM tool that just recently launched. So a lot of really interesting stuff going on in this space when it comes to actual compliance and how to prove compliance for something that's brand new. And then, as most folks are very keenly aware, right, the real sort of hook for Local Law 97, it's a little bit different than what's been out there previously, are the financial penalties that can come with non-compliance. And specifically, those penalties are based on a building's actual emissions, right? And those are based on your utility consumption, along with some published coefficients from the law. And then the allowed emissions for a property, that's effectively your limit, right? And that's set by your occupancy type and the gross floor area of those particular spaces. These two components are things that we'll talk more about when Jen gets into the tool. Part of what it does is evaluate Local Law 97 outlook and compliance based on user input information. So it's good to just kind of have that as the background. In terms of key dates, right, I mentioned there's a lot happening right now. It's the first reporting year. Again, just some key information in case you're newer to this whole thing. First compliance reports for the 2024 calendar year are coming up quite soon, May 1st of this year in 2025. There are opportunities for extensions. The filing extension request deadline is June 30th. So if you do find yourself strapped for time and you think you may need a little bit more, there's that ability to potentially file for an extension request. And then in the event that you're able to actually secure that extension, the deadline for reporting is August 29th. So it gives you a couple extra months to kind of get prepared and get things in order. If you are familiar with the idea of good faith effort, which is one of the compliance pathways that's available, that too, the deadlines kind of change depending on whether or not you pursue an extension. I don't think we need to get too much into that today, but just some key dates for you to be aware of that are coming up. Okay, so got a little background, got a little context about what's what. Now let's actually talk about what this tool is that's launching today, right? We're calling it, not very excitingly, the Local Law 97 Decarbonization Pathway Tool. A couple folks asked if we had a catchier name, and truth be told, we just don't. This is what it is. But effectively, it is a free Excel-based tool that lets owners preview both your Local Law 97 Outlook, but it also gives owners the ability to input data about potential projects that they're considering in their buildings and see how that changes the trajectory of the building's emissions profile over time. What is the mission of this particular tool? We've got three things that we really think that it does, that we hope that it does, right? One, simplifies some of the calculation around understanding where you stand relative to Local Law 97, right? It is user inputted information about your building, but once you put those things in, there's a lot of functionality on the back end that just auto calculates information so that you don't have to go through the effort of reading through the law and trying to understand how these things work together. So simplifying that whole process is part of it. Also making technical information accessible. So this tool is a way of bridging the gap between the engineering reports, the energy audits, the retro-commissioning reports that inevitably you've all probably come across and aren't really sure what to do with. We get a lot of feedback that this is a problem that, sometimes engineers put together reports that don't necessarily give folks the big picture idea of how things are going to change and move over time. And so this tool specifically is about making things easier to understand, easier to digest, and we do that through visualizations and through tips and tricks that Jen is going to go through when we get going here. And then last but not least, empowering decision making, right? So, at least in our experience, and again, we've heard a fair amount of feedback that a lot of the time what can happen is a condo or co-op board will get a report, and that report is kind of static, right? It doesn't give those folks that are making the decisions the opportunity to tweak and change. And what happens if I think about this project first and then this project? What would happen if I change the implementation year of a project, right? This experimentation and how to develop a decarbonization pathway for your building is something that condo and co-op boards are often left out of. And so we're hoping this tool can empower those groups to actually have a more active role in the planning of these different things over time. I think this slide here covers why we're even doing this, right? There's a lot of great resources out there already, make no mistake. And Rebecca mentioned a number of resources and entities that are working hard every day to try to make Local Law 97 accessible, and are trying to give people tools to succeed. That being said, we've found that historically engineers and energy service providers haven't always been the greatest at communicating the technical information in a way that condo and co-op boards can act on. And so we're really trying and hoping to get at that gap that has existed through this point. So hopefully this tool will support and supplement and be complementary to some of the resources that already exist out there in helping folks on the call just plan, again, more actively than they've been able to in the past. It does that. It does this specifically, and Jen's going to go through an actual example, so I'm not going to spend too much time here, but I alluded to it before. It gives people the opportunity to input building-specific data from those energy audit reports, from those, documents that are hard to sort of digest, and then it visualizes it and allows you to play with it, right? To essentially experiment with different combinations and whatnot, so that you really get a sense of how things can change over time. One thing that not one thing, but a couple of things that this tool is not, right? To be really clear about what its capabilities are and what we hope it'll do versus what it can't or doesn't do. It's not a replacement for professional engineers or energy service providers, right? So this isn't a tool that tells you what to do. It's a tool that takes information from other folks that have come in and done a professional assessment on your property, and it puts that information in a lens that's hopefully easier to work with, digest, and then actively experiment with. It's not the kind of tool that takes in a large set of data and generalizes that data to try to come up with average savings or average measures for a certain kind of building. Those tools exist and they can be very helpful. It's just not what this tool is about specifically. It's not a simulation-based energy model that accounts for the interactivity of potential projects or measures. And this is kind of a question we get from folks that tend to be a little bit more in the weeds, a little bit more technical. If you're toggling on and off different projects and layering them to see how it impacts buildings over time or your building over time, is there a potential that there's some double dipping, so to speak, on savings? The answer is yes, right? This tool is not an energy model that accounts for those very, very technical, specific items. But what it does do is it allows owners to get that big picture view of how these things work together in sort of a more comprehensive understanding around building decarbonization, right? So I want to be really clear about that as well. It gives you an answer that's close, but it probably doesn't give you exactly 100% the right answer. You know what I mean? Same thing in terms of financial modeling, right? We have some very basic KPIs, things that people typically look for decision making, but it's not a financial model that you can count on for things like, changing escalation over time, things like life cycle cost analysis, right? Like this is the basic information that you need to know about paybacks, cash flows in terms of savings and capital costs, very big picture stuff just to help you understand and make decisions. So I think the key items for boards to remember here, right? Three things. The information that you're going to enter, right? It's going to be specific to your building, and it really should come from a reputable source, right? And it should be relatively recent. So if you're not at the point yet where you've had an energy audit done in your building, that's okay, right? That's a prior step that needs to happen before you can ultimately interact with this tool, I think, in a way that's going to be most beneficial, because you need to be able to input that data and you want it to come from a recent and reputable source. The final point, right, primary mission of the tool is to empower boards to be active participants in planning. I know I've mentioned that multiple times, but it really is about making that technical information that's coming from outside sources easier to digest and work with and visualize. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Jen, who's going to start talking through some tool terminology, some different components, and then we'll start looking at real data. All right, Jen, over to you.
Thank you, Molly. I wanted to start the introduction of the tool by first clarifying the terminology used in this training and in the tool itself. So we know that out there are a lot of terms used to refer to any efforts to reduce building energy and emissions. They include retrofits, upgrades, capital projects, operational improvements, and so on. But for simplicity, we use the term in the tool measures to cover any of these types of upgrades, just so we're on the same page. And then the next term or the phrase has been used a couple of times already during this training is decarbonization pathway. What it is, it can sound abstract, but this tool is help you to design that decarbonization pathway. It's essentially an implementation schedule of measures selected by you, detailing the completion years of these measures with auto-projected total emissions, auto-projected cash flows, auto-projected Local 97 compliance status. So it's a very comprehensive, interactive schedule for you to play with. So now without further ado, here's the full content of the tool. Because we want to design this tool to be very simple and easy to use, it only composed of 3 sheets. The first one starts with instructions. This just gives you very general background and assumption used for the tool. The second sheet is the pathway worksheet. This should be the main components, the main application where you input your building information, and you can see and preview the outputs directly on the same sheet. This sheet will come in blank by default, but if you're not sure how to enter info, you can use the third sheet, which is exactly the copy of this blank sheet, but with pre-filled sample data. So if you're having questions, you can use the third sheet as a reference to fill out the data for your building. So now onto how to design the pathway. The first step you will do is to input the space types and areas for your building. All the input cells in this tool will be color-coded. The green cells are user selections from a drop-down, and the blue cell means direct user input. So the green cells, you start with selecting the space type that exists in your building from a list of 63 Energy Star space type. This is a requirement from Local 7 that you have to choose from one of those. And accordingly, on the right column in blue, you just enter the square footage. This way, this will tell the tool how your building emission limits will be calculated. Then at this step, we want to highlight something that might be overlooked for some folks. This chart shows the space type ranked by the lowest emission limits to the highest at the bottom. I will say for most space in condo or co-op buildings, space will be classified as multi-family housing. As you can see, it is highlighted in the top tier of these charts, meaning its emissions limits is relatively lower than those, for example, on grocery store, supermarket, or restaurant bar shown on the bottom. So the tip we want to highlight here is that if your buildings have any space type, they're shown on the bottom, make sure they're accounted for when you input the data of the space types in the table above, so that your building total limits will be accurately accounted for. If you are not sure the specific definition of the space type, on the slide above that we include this link on the bottom left side. And you can check it out later. Okay, now move on to the next step, which is to input your utility consumption. Only 1 year is needed, as shown in the screenshot. We encourage you to use 2024 usage year, because the intent is that this year will be used as the baseline year for the subsequent projection in the tool. If 2024 data is unfortunately not available yet, which actually might not be the uncommon thing here, you can still use old years. Old data is better than no data, but just remember when you have the new data available, make sure to come here and overwrite with the new information. Also, another important note to make here, this tool is designed to be used year over year. So moving next year, when you have the 2025 data available, make sure you also update it with the latest info so that all the baseline and projections in the tool are updated accordingly. With this, we can move on to the tip for this step. So I don't know if any one of you have experience putting information either in OnitStar or other portfolios. The tip is you need to be very careful with the units, and this is especially true for District STEAM. If you collect data and tally them from ConNet STEAM bills, you will notice ConNet use the term or unit MLB or M-pound. That actually means 1,000 pound. This tool requires the steam use energy in the unit of 1,000 pounds. So if you have the bills available, you can just directly put in the value before M pounds. There's no conversion needed. That's exactly what you need. And in comparison with other sources, for example, Energy Star, the column usually clearly labels K pounds, which is easier to understand. It actually means 1,000 pounds. So you can also go ahead and directly use those columns for summing and put it into that usage line. Right, so that's for step 3. And the last step for inputs is the measure information. This measure table, as Molly mentioned, the data should directly come from the reputable energy audits reports directly. You don't need to do any additional calculations in the table. You should directly copy the information from those assessments reports. Each line is a measure. And just make sure you follow the notes above those columns and put in the information in terms of the costs, in terms of energy savings and the cost savings accordingly.
I want to add one thing before we move on here too. So part of what's nice about this table, this input measures table, is that let's say you had an energy audit that was created a year ago. And you're able to enter that information in here. Jen's going to show us how to do that. But then you also have a separate vendor that comes a year later for a different project. It's still an energy project, but it's newer information. It's a different kind of project. You can add that into this table along with all those other measures. from the energy audit report. And again, you'll be able to kind of evaluate, well, what does that look like relative to these other projects, right? You can continue to add to this list over time from many different sources. It's set up so that you're saving the data in a consistent way so you can do apples to apples comparisons as you populate and gain more information around potential projects in your building.
Thanks for that add-on. This last slide we want to show here is where at this point that your inputs for the energy limits, the emissions limits, the energy usage, and the measures are complete. This is the point your projection outputs should be populated in the business as usual case where there's no measure selected yet. The way to add measures is on the last two columns of the measure table shown above. You will be able to determine what measures to include and when they should be done in which year. So the way to do it is, as you can see on the screenshot on the left, there's a column asking you, would you like to include this measure in this decarbonization pathway? So you toggle on and off to include or exclude any certain measure from the pathway. And the last column asks by which year to complete this measure installation. You can use this column to specify the year that you want the measures to be done. And with these information, as you make adjustment, the results on the visuals on the right will auto update to visualize the various impacts they will have on your building's KPIs. Very quick, I guess, overview of this visual. Like the top left visual is focusing on your local 97 projected penalty exposure. The red lines shows where your limits are for each year. The blue shade are showing the emissions saved by your measures you selected. And the gray bars are the remaining carbon emissions from a building. And if any year there's a risk for violation, the projected penalties will be shown in the bold red text above that year. The visual on this right is very similar, as you can see in shape and pattern, but except that it just highlights the decarbonization pathway in the blue solid line with corresponding number of measures done at that point. I will mention the last two visuals at the bottom. Those are just a projection of your financials of the selected pathway. It's very easy to understand. For any blue bars below the $0 line, those are cash outflows corresponding to the measure installation. As the savings are accumulating, those utility savings are shown in the positive cash inflows in green. And then the blue line, the solid line that you see here is the cumulative cash flow integrating all the impacts from these annual cash inflows, outflows. When this line reaches the zero line, that's the break-even year of your package of your pathway. The blue circle will highlight the year which the tool expect the expense will be paid off. The last chart, which is showing the general distribution of out-pocket costs between measured costs and penalty. So those are self-explanatory. I guess the great way to showcase how this tool works is by a real demonstration. But I think right now, at this point, it's a good time to open up for some questions before we dive into that.
Thanks, Jen. So I'm going to start. We have regarding the square footage that you enter into the tool, is that GFA? And I guess another question that would go with that is where could a board member find that information? Could they get it from their benchmarking report, or where could they locate that?
Yeah, I can go ahead and take that first question there. Can you repeat square foot versus GFA? So yes, it is gross floor area. So anything that you enter in here, it's aligned generally these definitions with Local Law 97, right? So reporting for Local Law 97 requires gross floor area, and it's defined in the law what that actually means and the specifics of how to measure that. I will say that it can depend, for example, folks might look at the Department of Finance website to try to understand what their building's floor area is. That's not necessarily the right number. And so for the question of where do I find this information, it can depend. I think probably if you have a benchmarking provider that's doing that work for you, hopefully they've gone through the effort of calculating gross floor area per the definition of local law 84 and 97, which would be the right number. That's where I would start. So Energy Star Portfolio Manager, if that's managed by somebody who does your benchmarking, I think that's a good place to kind of ask some questions and see whether or not that value is reflective of the definition.
And this carries on more on area types. If you have multiple space types, does the tool accommodate this?
Yes, absolutely. So Jen, I think there's how many different drop-down options are there?
The dropdown includes all the space types allowed in Energy Star, and for each building, the tool allows up to 8 different, like unique space type. So there should
Right.
be sufficient for condo or co-op typical building.
Yeah, so a good example of where you would want to use more than one is, let's say you have a condo or co-op building, right? And it's got maybe some retail in the very first level. Maybe it has a shared gym, right? Like those space types can and should be accounted for in the tool.
What emission factors are being used for 2035, 2040, and 2050 for electricity?
Great question. You want to take that one, Jen?
Sure. It's very expert question. Yeah, so we know that the Local 97 has published the coefficients for steam and actually all fuel types up through 2034, and that's what this tool exactly used. For years beyond 2034, we took a very conservative approach, or like a very generic approach. We use linear extrapolation to start from that point, 2034, to zero emissions in either 2040 or 2050, where the state has goals to make the grid or steam emission free. So for electricity, we assume a linear reduction line from 2034 to zero emissions in 2040. And for district steam, we assume equal reduction from the 2034 emissions to zero in 2050.
Yeah, and to put a finer point on that, so why those particular values? For electricity, it's the CLCPA, the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, that set that zero by 2040 goal for the electric grid. And then the Con Edison steam long-term or long-range plan is what identifies 2050 as their net zero goal for the steam system. So we have to base the data in something that is out there and available public that can be vetted by third-party sources, and so that's where we've used the data there.
Where can one download the tool?
So it will be available for download on the CNYC website, hopefully tomorrow at some point. We just need to get it uploaded once we do this training.
Which for those of you out there who are not CNYC members is cnyc.coop. So that's our website. Will this work in Google Sheets?
That's a great question. I don't actually know. Jen, do you have a sense? We haven't tried to actually import it, but there aren't any macros or anything, I don't think, in the regular Excel-based version, so
Yeah.
it's probably worth a
Yeah,
try.
yeah, we made it intentional not to use any add-ins or extensions or macros so that every system or computer should be able to use it, but we will try. We haven't tested it yet. We will try if we can convert it to Google Sheets, and if so, then if feasible, then we can definitely provide that link too.
Thank you. No question. They're just enjoying the presentation, so that's a nice and easy one. Is the useful life of the energy improvement included in the analysis?
By useful life, what specifically are you referring to? I think we need a little more detail there.
So if you want to type in a follow-up question for us, we can get it later. But I guess, like, for example, if like the typical useful life of a type of heat pump would be 15 years and you're installing it in 2025, is there a way to account for that or no?
Good question. So as of now and in the tool as it currently exists, no, it's sort of like a snapshot in time, and the entries that you'll be putting into the tool would be things like the upfront capital cost, that day one cost, right? The estimated energy savings, again, those would be the day one energy savings. We don't have the really specific life cycle cost analysis metrics in here because it complicates things significantly. And for the scalability of the tool, we wanted to keep it as easy as possible.
The energy impacts of different measures will come from the energy audits, question mark.
Yes, yeah, exactly. And so was going to pull up an actual sample report and we'll show where you can find the information and how you would translate it into the tool. But yes, the estimated energy savings should come from a professional analysis around that particular measure. And that can come from an energy audit if you had a vendor in for a replacement and they did some energy analysis for you, an energy service provider. Any of those sort of types of projects could turn out information that could be used in this tool.
Is there any way to include in the tool or the cost of bringing electricity to the building or up to the apartments? So not the cost of the measure, but the cost of upgrading your electric.
Yeah, so that's also a really good question. Yes and no. So the tool is won't know the difference between positives and negatives necessarily in terms of cash flow, right? So let's say you have a measure to install heat pumps. If you have included in the cost of that measure, the capital cost, the cost to do the preliminary work to bring additional service to the building, for example, the tool will take that information and it'll use it as part of its calculations and not be none, it won't be any the wiser that you're including that costly upfront work rather than something that directly relates to savings. It'll change your payback numbers, right? And the overall sort of like payback break even trajectory. But sure, you can include and should include the cost, the full cost of an upgrade or retrofit project in the tool to get the most accurate assessment of where you're going to go long term.
Okay, just three more questions and then we can actually see the tool. Do we need
Yes,
to
yes.
have already done an engineering report on a potential solution, or can we use this earlier in the process of identifying potential projects?
So I would say you do need to have an engineering report or some other reports that have been created around potential projects for your specific building. You'll see when we open up the tool, it's blank, right? There aren't any pre-populated measures. We don't know anything about your building at this point in time. And so we're counting on the work that's been done by others that you've worked with other engineers to identify potential projects that can then be brought into the tool.
On that point, if the question is to ask if the tool will identify the gap between your emissions and the limits, if there's any need for measures, I will say yes, because if you are done with inputting the building space types and the energy consumption, you should be able to see where the building stands right now without any measures. And this will tell you if there are any risk years and by how much. And using just this business as usual picture that you can identify in which year or by which year that you need to take actions and how large of a gap that you need to close, if that's what this question is intended for.
Thanks.
Yeah, if you're looking for this to tell you if you need to implement measures, yes, it does that because it'll show you the delta to Jen's point, but it doesn't tell you what those measures should be. Those measures that are being identified would be identified by an engineer or report, third-party report.
Just two more questions and then we're going to get going and then we can come back, at the end if there are more.
Of course.
Is it possible to know how much of the fines are applicable to the retail spaces versus the multifamily space? Or I guess those are the two type in this building. Is that usually in an energy audit? I don't know.
Not necessarily. So specifically, I think this question is getting at like, let's say you have a retail person in the bottom of the building and you'd like to kind of know what their contribution to the local law 97 penalty should be. There's certainly ways to calculate it. Our tool doesn't break things out that specifically, though. It gives you just whole building limits, right, based on the different space types, but it doesn't assign a percentage of fines, for example, to any one particular space type. That's usually a coordinated sort of like negotiation on how to deal with that situation that our tool doesn't do.
And the last question I think you're about to answer with the demonstration, but I know this is built for board members. Do you see a learning curve for using this, or do you see board members ready to use it the first time?
Well, our hope is that after Jen goes through the official demo, which looks at a real report, like a report that you would receive from a third-party provider and translates it into this tool, I hope folks will be ready to use it. But we're looking for feedback. So if you get into it, and even after this training, you're like, "Oh my God, we still are not really clear on what to do." That's great feedback. That's what we want to know. So we'll kind of wait to see what you think.
And just knowing boards, I think I'll just add to that. Like if you're the board treasurer and you're used to spreadsheets, this is going to be probably very easy for you to understand. And if you're maybe not a spreadsheet number person, may take a few goes. And CMYC is always here for you to help answer questions, and you'll have the videos and the slides and etc. So, all right, do you want to go, and then we'll answer remaining questions at the end?
Sounds like a plan.
Now, I will show my screen to share how you can actually start using this tool using a real sample. So Rebecca is kind enough to share with us a typical report for a condo or co-op building. I'm showing that in PDF right on the right side of the screen. So I want to confirm that everyone can see the screen well. It is an energy assessment for ASHRAE level 2, which is typically the level of study that we anticipate for people to already have done. And on the left side is the tool. The tool, as explained before, has only 3 sheets, and only the middle sheet is the main worksheet that you will use for inputs and outputs. So let's zoom in a little bit. The first section that we need to tackle here is the input building areas table. We have leave in here. The default for selection is multifamily, but just so you know that you can just use this drop-down buttons to like select any of this list, on this list. The list is long, so be patient. Sometimes you might miss it. But for multifamily, the selection is already selected for you. So what I need to do is to find what the square footage is for this building. My cheat sheet way or my trick is to always come to the table of contents of the report. The table of contents can be very long. In this case, it's 156 pages long. But usually for gross square footage, it will be answers something like a facility description or building information or existing conditions. In this case, I will try this building information, which is on page 10. Now, yeah. Okay, now it's showing measure table, but as you understand, maybe PDF sometimes will push down the pages with like cover pages or table contents. So scroll down a bit, you might find it eventually. Okay, looks like this is it. This is the basic building or site information. Looking for gross footage here. Gross area is 47,020. And the type building function here is multifamily. Doesn't seem like there are other special types. So I'll just go ahead and put in 47,20. And multifamily is already chosen. So good. We're all set for table 1. And the second table, which is the energy usage, again, I'll go back to table of contents. And then the keyword I usually search for is utility. And in this case, it's in this section, historical utility data grade seems like a good answer here, 32, page 32. Again, just scroll down a few pages. Here it is, historical utility data. So here's all the energy types for this sample building. Looks like it has some usage for electricity, natural gas, but none of the below here. So now I just need to make a special note of the units that I use because we don't want to like over report or something like that to misreport usage. But first of all, which year is that? It shows 2022. So 2022 and great. The electricity is already matching in terms of units. So I will directly put in that usage in. And then annual already in therms, natural gas in therms, great. Then 24,896. Double check. Okay, it's correct. Now we're done for energy usage. But before leaving this table, I do want to mention that if your building has additional field types that are not listed in here, you have the option to use these two placeholders, which are called annual other field 1, annual other field 2, to input additional field. Just put in the volume in kBTU. Let's say, well, this is the usage for that field type. Immediately, you will see this green cell for user selections will pop up. This is where you can select what that additional field type is. I will say like the common ones are fuel oil number 4 or diesel. But of course, you can just select any of these, whatever that your building use. But for this one, it only uses electricity and natural gas, so I will leave them blank. Automatically, you see this is the auto-calculated field, which tells you the total emissions as of 2022. Okay, now we're on to the last table, which is the measures table. And let's go back to the report and see where we can find them. I believe we already glossed over it quickly, because usually for the measure table, that's like one of the first takeaway that engineers want to highlight in the report. You can usually find them under executive summary. If not, if it doesn't include all the details because it's a high-level summary, you may also find them in a section maybe called measure description or measure recommendations. Even that doesn't give you the answers, then definitely will find the appendix because this is like the key information that's required for a standard energy study. So you should be able to find it in one of those 3 sections mentioned. In this case, I believe we saw that in the executive summary. Let's just scroll over. Yes, this is these 2 tables. And since this first table has 11 measures, the second also has 11 measures. So the same measures, but the second table just has more granular breakdown in terms of fuel type. Then in this case, I will use this second table. Just double check it has all the information that we need. This is measure name, energy savings. The measure cost is here. Okay, that's good. So just for the interest of the time, I have already tabulated this table because it's in PDF. I already tabulated into Excel just for easier copy pasting for this demonstration. But if you are not quite sure how to do that, or you don't know if the measure tables that you find is the one that you need, or you don't know how to just transfer the information over here, you should ask the engineer who give you their recommendations or in-house engineer or whoever you think are able to do that. And I'm also sure that if you reach out to Rebecca, to CYMC, they will help you to put that information to translate over here. But for now, let's see, we should be able to do a copy pasting really quickly. So measure ID, measure names, great. And then ask for install cost, which is this column. Just always make sure that you like paste as values so you don't carry over any like formulas by mistake. The next, ask for incentive rebates. This report doesn't seem, at least for this table, doesn't show any rebates. I will leave this blank for now. But also note that some of the columns will give you extra notes for maybe you want to find out about yourself what the incentives or rebates might be, because incentives are subjected to change year over year. If you reference like an old report from 5 years ago, even if they give you the incentive amount, that might be outdated. So always a good tip to go back to the source website, the source agency that provide incentive, and make sure the numbers are updated. So here we list this NYSERDA link to show you a list of potential incentive and their providers. Okay, next, we want to paste in all the energy savings. Okay, great. Also making sure the units are correct, which electricity should be in kWh and gas should be in therms. So it's all good. As you paste over, sometimes you will notice there are negative savings, which means that the measure doesn't help reduce, but increase in that particular fuel type consumption. This is actually not uncommon at all because for example, electrification measures, we expect the electricity usage will increase because that is to replace the fossil fuel usage, for example, natural gas, so that the building will be less reliant on fossil fuels. Instead, it will be using the grid electricity. That's a good trend that we want to promote because the grid electricity will decarbonize over time, whereas fossil fuels will stay constant in terms of emission intensity. Okay, there. The last column needed is utility savings. We can grab that from this column. Great. Okay, now we can close the report because all the information from the report is done. All that's left is the last two columns where you can design a pathway. Before going to that step, let's take a look at the measures that we have. Those are tools that we can use to reduce the building emissions. The table actually has some fields which can give you some quick insights in terms of the single payback of the measure. Just know that this payback only accounts for the utility savings and incentives if you have them. It doesn't include Local 97 savings yet because we don't know if the building has the penalty to speak of. So we want to make things simple. And using this simple payback, we can see the top three measures are relatively quick in terms of payback, and the cost is also almost low or minor. And the next tranche of measures, which are about solar, hot water heater, caulking, for weather stripping or Energy Star refrigerators, those are like about 10 or 20 years of payback. Okay, just to know that. And then the last tranche, which has either long paybacks or quite capital intensive for the upfront cost. Okay, with that, we have a general understanding what recommendations that we have, and then we can move on to the outputs, the projections of our building decarbonization pathway. We haven't really introduced this left section of outputs yet. The reason is because this left section of the outputs it represents the exact same information as shown on the right, but it just represents the results in KPIs, in numbers. If you like to maybe send information through emails or through like workbook, then you might want to copy paste these outputs instead of visuals. But for someone who is more visual, you can go directly to the charts on the right. This tells you the baseline of the building before you implement any measures where your penalty exposures are like. So in this case, looks like the building is in great shape all the way from 2024 through 2029 data year. For 2030, for the next phase through 2034, the building is almost at the edge of non-compliance. This is something that we want to watch out for. And the first risk here starts in 2035. And that corresponds to the cash outflows, which indicates that's the Local 97 penalty coming in. So that will drive the cumulative cash flow downward. That's also represented in this out-of-pocket costs in total here. Sorry, I just noticed we're really out of time, almost there. So I just want to show quickly the interactivity of this pathway. So of course, we want to take all these low cost measures because there's no reason not to. And let's implement it early on to recoup the cost savings. And then it sees, well, great, because it already reduced all the emissions to actually create some good buffer for the second phase already. But for the third phase, we're still at risk. In that case, we may want to see if there are any payback that we can, like median payback that we want to leverage. And let's do it right before 2035. Oops. So in 2034. Nope, that's not enough. That's add in a new one. Great. Now it shows we're good for that third phase and for the fourth phase. For any year, I will say after 2040, you want to really emphasize on measures that are effective in reducing your fossil fuels, in reducing your carbon emissions. So in this case, it will be these measures which are really effective in gas reduction. So let's just try maybe this one, because this one has relatively quick payback, and let's do it before 2040, so 2039. All right, that's already good enough and get you under the limit. So that's, I feel it's a good representation of how we anticipate this tool will be used. Obviously, as you set the initial pathway shape, you can come here like fine tune the year by a few years, or select a different, like for example, electrification combinations, and see how the impacts will be adjusted accordingly using the visuals here. So, okay, we're right on time. I guess, Rebecca, let us know if we still have time for additional questions.
I think if it's okay with you two, we do have some more questions, and for the people that want to remain on and hear the questions, we're gonna go through them. Is that all right, Molly, Jen? Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
please.
Okay. So I have like two questions, and then I'm going to go to the Q&A. One is, when you first enter the information, you would recommend going to look at the outputs before you start selecting projects, so that you can see where your building is as a baseline. Is that?
Yeah, I think that's a good way of going about it. It also upfront gives you some ideas of where you might want to start in terms of the types of projects you want to enable to start with and the years in which you want to enable, right? So for example, before you check any of your possible measures, if you see that your exposure is right in 2024, right, then you know that the types of projects you need to undertake can be done quickly and probably with little disruption, so you can knock them out and take care of that immediate risk. That's going to be different for somebody who's showing a compliance status where they're good until 2035, right? They can choose a whole different set of priorities based on that baseline information. So yes, definitely you want to check where you're at baseline before you start adding in projects to see what your decarb pathway should be based on, what's going to make what the most sense for your specific conditions.
Thanks. And I know Jean mentioned like the buffer, like where the compliance line is sort of directly on where your usage is now. And I know, like, from prior classes that we've had on benchmarking, that it's important to have a little bit of a buffer, I think, because your usage can fluctuate based on weather, other things like that, right? So if you're right on the compliance line and you think you're going to be okay, maybe, or maybe not. Did you?
Yes, absolutely agree. It's a good idea to have a little buffer. Um, this tool, as I mentioned before, right, it does simplify some things for the sake of being accessible and scalable. And so you always want to give yourself a little buffer in general, I think, just to make sure that you're comfortable with where you're at.
All right. And the last comment, and then we'll get going, is you looked first at the ones obviously with the shorter payback period and the lower cost, which is what most buildings are going to do. So that would be the process that you'd recommend, right? Is to first like play with those, see where those get you, and then move on.
Yeah, the general progression of things to consider, at the highest level would be energy efficiency type things that are quick paybacks, simple, easy, low disruption. Then more and more we see heat recovery type projects have like medium term paybacks that tend to be pretty good. And then in the long term, primarily we're looking at electrification or partial electrification solutions. And so those timings kind of work out that way where you do the short term energy efficiency stuff, maybe 5 years, get 10, 15 years for heat recovery, and then beyond that for deep electrification, depending on where you are to start.
Yeah,
Thank
I'll
you.
also add that for condo co-op buildings, you want to be attentive to tenant interruption or tenant disruptions. For certain measures that are affecting the tenants, you might want to plan for when the lease ends or whenever the tenants vacate the space, and then you can plan for that specific year. If not, and maybe want to stage it later, just be conservative.
Right, timing it to when most people won't be impacted. All right, I'm going to go to the Q&A now. So does this relate to the building energy exchange tool in some way? And do you want to?
Yeah, I can. Yeah, so it's completely separate, but the part where you get your local law 97 impact sort of like baseline condition, it uses the same process as the building energy exchange tool. And in fact, I think somebody asked earlier, well, is it, where can I go to get some of the information? That's actually another place you could go, right? If you're not sure what the building square footage is and you're not sure what the use types are, that building energy exchange tool actually pulls data directly from a database with the city. And so that could be an easy place to start. What that tool doesn't do is let you play with different projects, but it's still very useful for just understanding your high level local law 97 overview and could be used to start this tool if you're unsure of where to get your floor areas and your space types.
And also your energy usage, right? Because it pulls up on the side the electricity, gas, oil,
Yep.
etc. for whatever year you put in. So let's just say that like you can select different years on that tool so
Mhm.
you can compare year to year.
Yeah, that tool is fantastic. It serves a little bit of a different purpose, and that gives you, the data that we're talking about here in an online format. It's linked directly via API with those city databases. So it does make the whole first part of this tool potentially easier if you're not sure where to go for the information. Just beware that, like any data that is submitted to the city, some of it's really good and some of it's not so good. So sometimes we think it's a good idea to just double check yourself on your actual records, your bills, and make sure that it is in fact the right information that you're putting into this tool here.
I think she means local law 87. The local law 97 benchmark report has some measures suggested. Will this level of report be sufficient to start identifying pathways, or do we need to have measure-specific analysis in hand to put into the report? And I am guessing that means local law 87, the retrofitting report, is that what you used, Shen? You used an 87 report, I think, right?
I believe so. And that's
Yeah.
actually a great question that leads to a little bit nuance between energy audit and the retro commissioning because Local Law 87 require both to be done. And usually engineer reports will split the recommendation into an energy audit measure or a retro commissioning measures. The difference is that the retro commissioning measures must be completed, meaning the savings should be already included in the past year's energy bill. So for those retro commissioning measures, you don't need to include that in this tool anymore because the savings are already reflected in the energy consumption. But for the energy audit part, those recommendations, if they have not been implemented, you should definitely input that, add them to that measure table list, and make sure that you look out for any like energy savings or incentives if available in the report.
Right. And most audit reports would have that list in them, whether they were a LEAP report or what, or another type of flex tech audit or whatever it is they did, right? It's all going to list measures that they can pull in. Is that?
Yeah, in fact, almost all like required or state/city funded type engineering reports for energy have standardized requirements about what needs to be in that report. And so whether it's like a flex tech study or it's specifically for local law 87, energy service providers are required to give you kept cost, utility savings, the breakdown of where your utility savings would be in terms of the units of energy, right? So there should be consistently good information from those types of reports to pull into this tool.
Thank you. If someone has a question about how to fill this tool out, is there a way to contact you? So it's our intent to try to make it as clear as possible. And then if specific co-ops and condos have questions, they can obviously call CNYC. But as we get the questions in from the initial round, we'll relay them to Molly and Jen and try and come up with maybe additional documents on how to fill it out. Does that sound right to you guys? Or
Yeah, I think that sounds pretty reasonable. We definitely want feedback to know if it's not clear how to fill it out, and then we can specifically address specific, kind of like shortcomings, if you will, of maybe the data entry or the process. For like very specific buildings that are just trying to input very specific measures, right? Hopefully that would go through the CNYC process first in terms of just getting some support. But yeah, we're definitely open to feedback and doing some tweaks based on the bigger picture sort of like interaction that you have with the tool, right? Because we want it to be useful. And so if you're in there and you're finding that there's like a systematic issue that is preventing you from using it in a useful way, we definitely want to know that. And it's something that we'll work to fix.
thanks. For discussion with shareholders, it would be useful to have the baseline chart. So like the board could print that chart and then the chart with the measures on a separate sheet so that shareholders can see. I think that's an excellent idea. Shareholders would be able to see like, this is where we are. If we do this, you could even print like 2 or 3 different variations out to explain your rationale. Okay.
Absolutely. I think that's a great idea too. The chart that Jen has just kind of zoomed in on here, the black line is your baseline as if you didn't implement anything, and then the blue line shows what your chosen decarbonization pathway is, along with how many measures you've implemented over any given time. You could absolutely, right, take that, throw it on a different sheet in Excel or put it in a PowerPoint, and then do a different pathway and put that side by side so that you can see the differences between the two different options. That's exactly the kind of thing we're hoping this will be used for. And then it gives you a real sense of like, as you tweak things, check things on and off, change the implementation years, you can really get a very different shape on that decarbonization pathway. And that's the kind of thing we want to be communicating to shareholders and other people who need to sort of conceptualize what the long-term plan is.
Can you review the input measure chart where you got the data from for each column?
Is there a specific result column that are being asked? If not, all the inputs are all taken from these 3 tables. All the inputs in blue cells are used in generating the final results for the charts.
I'm guessing he was talking about the input measures chart because of the copy and paste. I don't know if you want to quickly go back to the PDF where you got the information because you could have entered it from there, but took it from the Excel, right? So just to quickly show where.
Yeah. Yeah, for this demonstration, we use this table, which I also believe is a local 87 report table. Yeah, because of the very unique neon green color. So yeah, this definitely works in terms of the inputs for our tool.
Yeah, the reason we took something from Excel was just because it was going to take too much time to like type it in line by line from the PDF here. So ahead of time, Jen just took all this information, put it in a separate Excel so she could copy and paste it easily. But in the reality of like a board or somebody specific going through this, they might have a report like this that they would literally say, okay, EEM1, this is what it's called, and then here's the data from that table that I'm entering directly into the Excel tool.
Sorry. The next one is more of a comment than a question, and certainly reach out to our office and we can try and help you through this. But regarding the realities of what co-ops are dealing with, unfortunately, the OSHRAE energy study our building paid for doesn't provide much of this information. So if you find that's the case as you're doing the project, please get in touch with us. Or if you got the report through Accelerator, maybe get in touch with Accelerator and we'll try and get you set up so that you can use the tool.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a great point and worth reiterating that there is a certain standard for what should be included in these types of reports, and it should be this kind of information. And if you're not getting that, then there's definitely an issue there.
Okay. Going to try and go through the rest quickly for you guys. For the measures that include direct electrification, like heat pumps, does the tool factor in the additional electricity costs that will be incurred?
Yes. Well, so in terms of the additional capital cost, for example, to upgrade the service to the building, it depends on whether or not whoever did the study for you included that in the capital cost number, right? In terms of this, the savings or costs from a utility perspective, as in you're using more electricity and therefore potentially are incurring more electricity cost, yes, that is included and should be included as part of the analysis, regardless of whether or not they've included the capital expenditure for what we would call infrastructure enabling work. Hopefully that answers the question. That's why you see some negative numbers in here, in fact, right? So yeah, there you go. Those are two examples.
Right. And I see like this report didn't have the window replacement, and the roof replacement. So you'll see a variation.
Right.
Um, uh, Thanks all. Is there any way to account for local law 97 deductions like the beneficial electrification credit?
Great question. So not in this version of the tool. Again, just in the interest of making it easy and accessible and to be able to do it on a pro bono basis. It takes a lot of sort of like more detailed modeling work and back end work to get those specific nuances in place. And so we intentionally have not included some of the pathways deductions, beneficial electrification credit, things of that nature that are good options that it's great that you're aware of, but no, the tool doesn't include them.
So a couple of thank yous for the tool and people excited to use it. And another question, Jen, you just used the PDF, converted the results into Excel, and then pasted into the tool. Yes, right?
Yes, yes. Um, I might be able to show a quick trick for converting for like cell like a screenshot to Excel, if I have time. So yeah, in terms of like when you are reading from PDF, if you have like screen clipping like app available, you can go ahead and just take a screenshot, make sure that you include all the information you need, and then use this, well, we just copied it, and then like take any like Excel blank pages, and then use insert. Let me just show a full screen here in data actually. And then from picture, there's the option to insert pictures from clipboard, which you just did because you just took a screenshot and click that. Then you will be able to, I guess I didn't click that. And if you do it the right way, you should be able to tell Excel to actually scrape the data from that screenshot and read it from there. Let's take a second shot, see if it works. Yes, I want to overwrite the previous one. So I can see like Excel can auto read, but not perfectly, but at least we'll give you a starting place and you can just say, okay, go ahead, insert away. You see, it doesn't look pretty, but at least save some legwork. This is just a quick trick.
Thank you. And I happen to know the person who asked that question. He is a total computer junkie, so he appreciated
Okay.
that. um, have you talked to the energy audit companies about using the tool? We haven't had our audit done yet. Should we expect the provider to complete this tool? So no, the provider is going to give you the report and then you'll be able to use the report. But the nice thing is that the report won't be limited to that one audit. So if you have another audit done in the future, or you get a proposal from somebody else because there's new equipment out there, you can then update this and change it around.
Yep.
Okay, and last question. So the input data table comes from your local law 87 report.
Or similar. Yeah. So it could be that at some point you had an energy audit done for some reason other than Local Law 87. Could also be that you had a vendor come in that specifically was like, hey, your building's a great candidate for this technology. And if you were to install it, you would save this much money and you would save this much energy, right? Some of the some examples of that would be things like controls type optimization or smart thermostat type optimization programs, right, where a specific vendor has come in and given you some sort of quote. That would be a good place to take data from as well. Even if you had like an infrastructure assessment, right? Let's say you have some old equipment that you're thinking about replacing. If you had somebody come in and assess that equipment and give you a quote for an upgrade to a nicer piece of equipment, chances are it's more energy efficient. Maybe you get some energy savings. That information would be another place to take this kind of data. I think the most comprehensive and the easiest place is absolutely from like an energy audit 87 type report, but you're not limited to that. And to Rebecca's point, maybe you had an energy audit done and you didn't like any of the measures, right? And then so you had a second one done. So you could look at all of those, right? All the data from both of those measures you could input into the table and then toggle them on and off to see how they work together or don't work together, right? It just sort of depends on what you have.
Okay, and last question. Will the tool be updated to factor in changes in policies affecting incentives and costs? And I know the incentives you can look up from NYSERDA and put them in, right? Based on what's available now. I don't know in terms of costs.
Yeah, so that's part of the user inputted data from the report, right? So if you have a report that's done in 2023, your service provider should have included specific data around utility, for example, that is for that particular year. Similarly, if you have an audit done 3 years later, the utility rates that are used in the analysis should be reflective of that point in time. And so when you enter the data, you don't have to account for any of that because in theory it should have already been accounted for in the analysis done by your professional engineer.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right.
And also
Yeah,
if the question, sorry, if the question is asking about like what if the coefficients for electricity or steam are published after 2034, yes, we definitely, I don't think why not. So yeah, we can definitely go update the coefficients, the back end for you. Also, if limits changes, we're also happy to do the update.
Thank you. All right. So that's it for tonight. There are two other questions, but I can answer those offline. We really appreciate the efforts that you've made on behalf of Co-op and Condo board members. I've been dreaming personally about a tool like this for like 2 years, so I really appreciate having it. And I'm sure everyone else on the call does as well. To everyone who stayed with us, thank you so much for your time once again as volunteer board members. We really appreciate how much you put into your buildings, and I'm sure your shareholders do as well. And thank you, Molly and Jen. It's amazing.
Thanks for having us. It's our
Yeah, thank
pleasure.
you
Hopefully folks find it useful.
Good night,
Appreciate it.
everybody, and feel free to email me with additional questions.